The air inside the Galactic Federation's war room buzzed with quiet amusement. Towering figures from a dozen species filled the chamber, their expressions ranging from amused to outright dismissive. Captain James, Reaper, Caldwell and his SAS team stood in the center, utterly out of place. No cybernetic enhancements, no energy shields, no advanced weaponry, just simple ballistic rifles slung over their shoulders and hard, unreadable expressions. High Marshal Vorkin, a battle-scarred veteran of the Ithri species, leaned forward on the command table, his mandibles twitching in what passed for a grin. "This is the best Earth has to offer." His deep voice carried a tone of mock disbelief. One of his officers, a towering reptilian Zarkari, huffed a guttural laugh. "I expected more. Where are their augmentations? Their neural links? Do they even have battlefield AI?" Caldwell let the laughter roll over him. He'd seen this kind of arrogance before. The moment someone believed they had already won was the moment they were most vulnerable. He simply adjusted his gloves, gaze steady. A Federation officer stepped forward, clearing his throat. "The combat exercise will take place in Zone 9, dense jungle terrain. The objective, eliminate the opposing force. Standard combat rules apply." His eyes flicked toward the humans with a hint of sympathy. "Your team will be facing a mixed unit of elite soldiers from the Federation's finest divisions." The Zarkari commander smirked. "We'll give them a 10-minute head start. Make this sporting. Don't do us any favors," Caldwell said, his tone even. Vorkin let out a rasping chuckle. "Very well, human. Impress me." The countdown began. SAS boots hit the dirt, moving swiftly through the thick jungle as if they trained here their whole lives. Caldwell's voice came through the comms, calm and sharp. "Standard ghost formation. We're shadows now. Keep low, no noise." Leaves rustled as men vanished into the terrain. Within minutes, the SAS was gone, leaving no trace. On the other side of the jungle, the alien force advanced with confidence, their armor glinting under the dim sunlight filtering through the canopy. They moved as soldiers of a superior race, no urgency, no concern. "Thermal scans are negative," one of them muttered. "Doesn't matter," growled another. "They're slow, weak. We'll flush them out soon enough." A click. A tripwire, barely noticeable beneath the undergrowth. Before the Zarkari soldier could react, the explosion ripped through the squad, sending bodies flying. A heartbeat later, suppressed gunfire cracked through the trees. 3 aliens dropped before the rest even registered the ambush. Panic spread. Their shields flickered to life, but the humans had already repositioned. Shadows moving between the trees, unseen. The aliens fired wildly into the jungle, plasma bolts scorching the foliage, but they were shooting at ghosts. One of the Kreshik, an insectoid warrior with razor-sharp reflexes, activated his motion scanner. It was cutting-edge tech, capable of detecting anything that moved within 50 meters. He never got to use it. A knife slid between the plates of his armor, severing his secondary heart. As he collapsed, a whisper reached his dying ears. "Too slow." The remaining squad leaders regrouped, eyes darting wildly. "This is ridiculous," one spat. "They're not fighting fair." A distant voice crackled through their comms. "Vorkan. Then perhaps you should stop underestimating them." Sweat slicked Caldwell's brow beneath his helmet, but he was grinning. This was textbook. The aliens relied too much on technology. They had no instincts for real war, only simulations and calculated engagements. They had never fought an enemy they couldn't see. "Phase 2, he murmured. A fresh explosion rocked the jungle. Smoke grenades hissed, spreading thick cover, and in the chaos, the SAS struck again. Gunfire, quick and precise, cutting through the disoriented warriors. A Zarkari officer managed to find cover, panting. His mandibles twitched, scanning wildly for any sign of movement. A rustling. He spun, plasma rifle raised. Nothing. Then a whisper behind him. "Boo!" A rifle butt slammed into his skull, and darkness took him. High above, in the observation deck, Vorkan watched in stunned silence. He had expected a slaughter, just not against his own men. His elite warriors, outfitted with the best tech in the galaxy, were being picked apart by a force armed with nothing but primitive rifles and their own wits. The laughter that had once filled the chamber was gone. Caldwell crouched behind a fallen tree, scanning the battlefield. The aliens were breaking. Their formations collapsed, their discipline shattered. And the humans? The humans were ghosts. The humans were winning. The jungle air was thick with the acrid scent of scorched foliage and gunpowder. Somewhere in the distance, a wounded alien groaned before falling silent. The battle wasn't just turning, it had already turned. Captain Caldwell crouched beside a fallen log, wiping sweat from his brow. His men were invisible, each one tucked away in the dense vegetation, waiting for the next move. Through the comms, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Status. 3 down. No casualties," came Sergeant Whitaker's reply. "Good. Let's finish this." Somewhere ahead, the remnants of the alien force huddled together, their once arrogant confidence shredded. They had started with numbers, technology, and the belief that this was nothing more than an exercise. Now they were stranded, their advanced scanners useless, their weapons nothing but beacons in the dark. One of them, a reptilian Zarkari, slammed his fist into a tree trunk. "This isn't possible! They have no cloaking, no neurocombat links. They shouldn't be winning!" A Ithri officer checked his motion scanner, mandibles clicking in frustration. The display showed nothing but jungle. "They're using the terrain. Hiding their heat signatures. No direct engagements, only ambushes. They're fighting like predators," a gruff voice finished. The Ithri turned to see High Marshal Vorkin watching from the hollow display, his usual smirk absent. His voice carried none of the earlier amusement. "You underestimated them. That was your first mistake." The Zarkari spat, his tail flicking. "And the second?" A single shot rang out. One of the remaining warriors collapsed, a hole punched clean through his helmet. "Standing still," Vorkin said grimly. Caldwell watched the scene unfold through his rifle scope. He could see it in their posture now, the hesitation, the uncertainty. "Good. Let them feel it." A distant explosion shook the ground. One of the remaining aliens stumbled forward, eyes wide. "That was... Bravo team," Caldwell muttered under his breath. 300 meters away, Sergeant Whitaker and his unit had moved into position. They had predicted exactly how the aliens would retreat, back toward what they assumed was safety. But there was no safety, only a kill box. The moment the first soldier stepped into the clearing, the trap was sprung. Claymores hidden in the undergrowth erupted, sending shrapnel slicing through the air. Smoke grenades popped, filling the area with a thick white haze. The aliens panicked. They fired wildly, plasma rounds cutting through nothing but empty space. Their enhanced vision modes were useless in the dense smoke, their targeting systems failing to lock onto anything solid. Then the ghost struck. Knives flashed in the fog. Silent shapes moved in the chaos, cutting down enemies before they could react. Suppressed gunfire whispered through the air, and bodies fell before they could even scream. One of the Ithri warriors stumbled backward, his mandibles clicking in panic. He swung his plasma rifle toward a flicker of movement. "I see one!" A flashbang detonated at his feet. He barely had time to react before a knee drove into his chest, slamming him against a tree. His rifle was ripped from his hands, and before he could process what was happening, cold steel pressed against his throat. A voice, calm and measured. "Surrender." The Ithri's mandibles twitched. His people never surrendered. The blade pressed deeper. He dropped his rifle. One by one, the remaining warriors fell, either to the jungle or to their own fear. The battle that should have lasted minutes had stretched into hours, but it was over now. From the observation deck, Vorkin's eyes narrowed as he watched the last of his soldiers dragged into the clearing, disarmed and defeated. The silence in the control room was deafening. The smug laughter was gone. The sneers had faded. Caldwell stepped forward, lowering his rifle. His expression never changed, not even as he locked eyes with the High Marshal through the live feed. "I think," Caldwell said evenly, "that concludes the exercise." Vorkin exhaled slowly, his mandibles tightening. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The captured warriors sat in the clearing, their armor scorched, their weapons stripped away. Some of them still panted, their bodies trembling from adrenaline and disbelief. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The Galactic Federation's finest should have crushed the humans within minutes. Instead, they had been hunted. Caldwell stood before them, his rifle hanging loosely at his side. He let the silence drag on, the weight of their defeat settling over them. None of the aliens spoke. They avoided his gaze, their once proud expressions replaced with something else: resentment, confusion, and, in some, reluctant respect. One of the three, still clutching a wound on his arm, finally broke the quiet. "You cheated." His voice was a strained growl, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "No real soldier fights like this. You don't engage. You run. You ambush from the shadows. This is not war." Caldwell met his gaze without flinching. "It's survival." The Zarkari officer, the one who had mocked them before the exercise began, scoffed. His face was still smeared with dirt from when he'd been taken down. "Survival is for the weak. Warriors stand and fight." Sergeant Whitaker stepped forward, arms crossed. "That's why you lost. You think war is about strength. It's not. It's about winning." The Zarkari's tail twitched, his jaw tightening. "With dishonor." Caldwell crouched in front of him, his expression unreadable. "You call it dishonor. We call it efficiency. Every advantage we can take, we take. You fight like you expect the enemy to play by your rules. We fight like there are no rules. Because in real war, there aren't any." Another warrior, a towering insected Kreshik, tilted his head, his antennae twitching. "Then why didn't you kill us?" His multifaceted eyes gleamed with curiosity. "You had the chance. Every time." Caldwell studied him. "Because this wasn't a real war. Just a lesson." From the observation deck, Vorkin watched through the live feed, arms crossed, face unreadable. The other officers in the chamber remained silent, processing what they had seen. The superiority of the Galactic Federation had never been questioned, until now. One of the younger commanders, a feline-featured Morvani, leaned closer to the display, her ears twitching. "They were never meant to win, yet they did." "How?" Vorkin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he observed Caldwell, the way his soldiers carried themselves. They weren't gloating. They weren't mocking their defeated opponents. They simply stood calm, steady, prepared. Even in victory, they were watching, waiting. "They fight without ego," Vorkin finally said. "Without arrogance. They don't rely on their tools or their numbers. They rely on themselves." A silence followed his words. The Federation officers had never seen war like this. They had always fought with an overwhelming technological advantage, with structured formations and precise strategies. But the humans had turned the battlefield into something else entirely. A place where rules were meaningless, where chaos was controlled, where strength meant nothing if you were already dead before you could use it. Back in the jungle, the remaining Federation warriors sat with their heads bowed. Some seethed with anger. Others stared at the humans, their pride warring with the undeniable truth. The Zarkari officer finally spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "We underestimated you." Caldwell nodded. "You did." The Zarkari exhaled through his nose. "I won't make that mistake again." A small smirk flickered at the edge of Caldwell's lips. "Good." He turned, signaling to his team. One by one, the SAS soldiers melted back into the jungle, disappearing as quickly as they had come. The lesson was over. But its impact would last far longer. Vorkin stood in the war room, watching the aftermath unfold on the holo display. His warriors were being retrieved from the jungle, their armor scorched, their expressions grim. The jungle battlefield was silent now, but the echoes of the lessons still hung in the air. The other Federation officers had dispersed, some still in shock, others deep in thought. The smugness that had once filled the chamber was gone. A new awareness had taken its place. The humans were not to be dismissed. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. A direct channel had opened. "Hi, Marshal." Caldwell's voice came through, steady and calm. "I assume you have what you need." Vorkin turned toward the communication panel, his mandibles tightening. "I do." He could hear the edge of something in Caldwell's tone. Not arrogance. Not mockery. Just certainty. "This wasn't about proving ourselves," Caldwell continued. "We already know what we can do. This was about showing you." Vorkin let out a slow breath. He had seen countless battles, fought wars across the stars, and crushed entire resistance movements. And yet, in a single afternoon, a handful of humans had dismantled an elite force without suffering a single loss. "I underestimated you," Vorkin admitted. The words felt foreign, but he would not deny the truth. "We all did." A brief silence followed. Then Caldwell spoke again. "That's what gets you killed." Vorkin considered that. Below, in the medical bay, the injured Federation soldiers were being treated. The Zarkari officer sat on the edge of a cot, staring at his hands, lost in thought. Nearby, the Ithri warrior who had accused the humans of fighting dishonorably watched a medic patch his wound, saying nothing. They had trained their entire lives, believing they were the pinnacle of military evolution. Yet they had been outmatched by soldiers who carried no energy shields, no neural enhancements, just instinct, discipline, and a refusal to fight by conventional rules. The door hissed open, and Caldwell stepped inside, his rifle slung over his back. The room went quiet. Even the medics paused. The soldiers, despite their injuries, straightened. Caldwell's gaze swept over them. "You fought well," he said. The Zarkari looked up, brow ridged in confusion. "We lost." Caldwell shrugged. "Losing isn't the same as failing. You learned something today." The Kreshik warrior tilted his head. "And what exactly is that?" Caldwell stepped closer. "That war isn't about strength. It's not about honor. It's not about who has the biggest guns. It's about who walks away when it's over." The room remained silent. Caldwell gestured to the holographic display on the wall, which still flickered with remnants of the battle. "You rely too much on your technology. You expect fights to be fair. But real war isn't fair. And if you don't adapt, you'll lose the next one. Not in an exercise. In a real war. When it actually matters." The Ithri officer met his gaze, mandibles twitching. "And you? You don't fight fair?" Caldwell shook his head. "No. We fight to win." The words lingered. The Zarkari officer let out a slow breath, his tail curling around the base of his cot. "I still don't like your methods." Caldwell smirked. "You're not supposed to." He turned, pausing in the doorway. "But you should respect them." With that, he stepped out, leaving the soldiers to their thoughts. Later, as the human team prepared to depart, Vorkin met Caldwell on the docking platform. The SAS soldiers were already boarding their transport, their movements efficient, disciplined, as if none of this had been anything more than a routine drill. Vorkin studied Caldwell for a long moment before speaking. "The Federation will remember this." Caldwell met his gaze evenly. "Good. Next time, don't forget it." Without another word, he stepped onto the transport, and the hatch sealed behind him. As the ship lifted off, Vorkin watched it go, the weight of what had happened settling onto his shoulders. The humans had won. But more than that, they had changed everything.